APUS History, Lesson 27, American Foreign Policy and Imperialism. When you're looking at the United States in the era after the Civil War and sort of after or during the Gilded Age and leading up to the dawn of the 20th century, you're seeing a nation that's going to engage in some new and different colonial activity from things that are done in the past. Now, that being said, American destiny has always sort of been expansionist. I mean, going all the way back from Jamestown and Massachusetts Bay, through Manifest Destiny, through the Louisiana Purchase, through Florida and Texas acquisitions, through California, the Austin Manifesto involving desires for Cuba during the antebellum period by Southerners. We'd always seen this theme, this underlying current in American history of some form of expansion. But a shift that we're going to see during this era now will be the shift from sort of annexation or directly pulling areas in as full states to what we'll call imperialism. And if I were to define the term as it's being practiced by the United States and other powers, great powers during this time period, it would be the imposition of control over other peoples, which denies them their sovereignty and the right to make their own political decisions. Now, it can take numerous forms. Imperialism doesn't simply have to be I'm going to invade you and turn Texas from Mexico into part of the United States. It could be. So it could be annexation. It could also be colonization, whereby as a nation state, I have colonies around the world, but I'm never going to make them full equals. It could be just military occupation. I'm never going to even make you partner, integrate you in my empire. I'm simply going to integrate you in my nation, rather. I'm simply going to occupy you. And it could be informal, the threat of manipulation. Park a armored task force right off your border, or park a battleship right off your naval limits of your ocean there, and try to get influence that way. So the threat of informal manipulation or intimidation. And so why imperialism during this time? I guess if you're going to try to find some reasons why, I've tried to come up with some mnemonic devices for you, some memory tricks to help you out a little bit. They're not all mine, but some are super old, but they still work and they help out. As you remember perhaps from your own teacher and from certainly some of the lessons we've done in Get a 5 with early colonialization from Europe, the 3 Gs, gold, glory, God. That had to do with why the Europeans came to the New World in the first place. But for American purposes here at the dawn of the 20th century, we're going to expand upon that and make it more specific in some ways that might help you out a little bit. What I call the 5 or 5.5 Ds, or perhaps the 6 Ps, whichever one works best for you. Whether it's destiny, Darwinism, defense, dollars, democracy, and the deity, or profits, patriotism, population, politics, piety, and paternalism, or whichever one works best for you. And I want to kind of walk through some of those now to talk about what I mean by them. So the D of dollars. Well, I'm sorry, we'll start with the D of destiny, I guess. D of destiny to be what? Manifest destiny, that we had this special purpose as a unique nation, almost going back to the city on the hill idea, that we're specially charted to do these things as all great powers do. Darwinism, the argument of social Darwinism being survival of the fittest. Maybe the notion is that if all great nations are going to do this, is going to be conquered or be conquered, we have to step up to the plate as one of the big nations and do this, otherwise it'll be done to us. Almost like the board game of Risk, where the goal is dominate other nations on the map because you don't want to be dominated yourself. Defense. If other nations are doing this, maybe our national security indicates that it dictates to us that we need to engage in this colonial expansion whether we want to or not. Because if you look at our new map, notice the new map that we have today for the United States to look at. It's different than the other maps that we've used in review classes and review sections so far. The United States is on it, but there's a whole big broader world around it. If other great powers, specifically Europe, are engaging in great power politics and they're colonizing here, 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 all over there, and even down here, if we sit idly on our hands and do nothing, we could ultimately wind up the United States in a world whereby we were surrounded by colonial possessions of other great powers who could then use those colonial possessions with their resources and economic power to become greater than the United States and even a direct threat to the United States in terms of our own internal security. So defense might dictate sort of a keeping up with the Joneses kind of argument. If other great powers are doing this, national security indicates we probably need to do it as well, just for our own interests, to keep our own interests secure and safe. Democracy, the idea of spreading this good thing, this representative government to other nations, whether they want it or not. Almost like the metaphor of, a child taking their medicine. They might not know they want to be free in a democratic nation. We're going to show it to them. We're going to give them democracy. There's some sketchy logic with that. We'll get into that a bit later on. And the deity. Deity is another word for God. In other words, maybe we're doing God's will. If you're explained as profits, patriotism, population, politics, piety, and paternalism, you get a lot of the same things. Profits being we're going to make a lot of money from this policy of trade. Patriotism, our love of country is going to extend it in many ways. Population, we're overcrowded as we are, and so we need to extend in some new areas to colonize for our own purposes. Politics, it's good to get people elected, and we'll talk about that through this unit as it goes on. This becomes a good policy to get people elected. Piety, which is a word about being kind of devout. Once again, we're doing God's will. Or paternalism, the idea of we're going to do for other nations what's good for them, because implied in this is white Anglo-Saxon civilization knows what's better for other nations on the planet than those actual nations home people know on their own. So we're going to do them a favor of we're going to give them freedom, which sounds like a sort of a contradictory thing, but that was sort of how it played out. So to sum up in many ways, why expansionism itself revived after the Civil War. We'd seen expansionism prior to the Civil War, which had been the Manifest Destiny model about going sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic Pacific to California, Oregon territories, etc. After the war, it involves in many ways discussions of markets. We've already seen in earlier reviews and through your history lessons in your courses the tremendous industrial and economic growth of the United States during this period. We were seeing then that the United States had more goods than it could sell domestically and internally, so there was a need to try to extend and sell overseas. Colonies or the external projection of force might be a way to help provide this. Religious conversion, foreign markets rather, became clear that by outstripping internal production, we could then extend and sell these goods and never have a surplus elsewhere. In terms now of religious conversion, the idea that the outsiders, the so-called little brown brothers of William Howard Taft's referencing the conversion of so-called natives and savages of other non-white Anglo-Saxon societies would be good for them, and as we saw, doing our own Christian duty. And additionally, commerce, we thought, would follow the missionary. If we convert people to Western civilization in terms of Christianity, we may convert them to Western civilization as well in terms of consumer tastes, habits, desires, and governance, etc. Anglo-Saxon superiority kind of falls in this as well. We're kind of it's a blend of mixing the idea of self-interest and idealism together. It's good for us to extend, and we're saying it's good for these other people if we do it as well. We're going to extend these blessings of liberty and prosperity to all these other people around the globe. Josiah Strong, in his work Our Country, argued in a Darwinian sense that it was America's duty to expand. We couldn't ignore it, couldn't shrink from that duty. It's our duty to expand and extend to help dominate the globe with our people, and also then helping out those other people we came in contact with through their contact with us. In some ways, this is not unlike, you might think, the argument of the white South on how slavery was a positive good for the slave because it brought slaves in contact with white Christian civilization. There were other American critics of this time period of expansion who made that same argument. That's a somewhat shaky logic. We'll deal with that here in a slide or two. The idea of American exceptionalism ties in as well, along with white man's burden. It's the duty from the Kipling tale of the white man to go out and bring light to the darkness, if you will. But we're going to expand American ideas as a unique nation, the city on a hill, the Puritan idea, which was we were unique and special, the special covenant with God to do great things. Now our great things, we're going to transform that model into great things being colonization and this external contact. And lastly, expansion being revived because of the notion of new frontiers and the frontier thesis. In 1893, Frederick Jackson Turner comes up with the Turner thesis, which talks about the significance of the frontier in American history. He was a college professor at the University of Wisconsin. His argument was, if you remember this from our reviews on the Western frontier, was that the frontier made America unique in many ways. It made us unique because we had this so-called safety valve. Whenever we had an economic downturn or a population excess, Turner argued that we could then extend ourselves into these new westward frontiers, and by so doing, absorb these extra populations, absorb these economic downturns by focusing our energies on the development of these regions. Well, by the time you get to the 1880s, 1890s, Turner makes the argument that the frontier is closed. So other American foreign policy and internal policy analysts say we simply need to extend and find frontiers that are off the direct map, frontiers that are not immediately contiguous with us anymore. And doing so would then provide this safety valve, this outlet for American population and this outlet for surplus American goods. And a major player into this would have been the author, Naval Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan, who writes another book that's very important to history, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. We've talked in my reviews about a few books that have been pretty important to the American experience. One being Uncle Tom's Cabin, another one here being The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. Mahan argues that all great nations had what were called blue water or deep ocean navies. In other words, the ability to project their military, political, economic, and social influence beyond their own borders. The Greeks had it, the Romans had it, the Phoenicians had it, the British had it. The United States, if we're going to presume and assume that we're going to step up as a great nation, a great power political nation, and play great power politics, we're going to have to extend as well. And Mahan made the argument for colonies, particularly in the Pacific, as almost stepping stones. Hawaii, Midway, Wake Island, Guam, Philippines, stepping stones across the big ocean to give us a front door to Asia for the markets of Asia and commerce with Asia. And so as such, his book had great influence on American history. He says that we need an efficient Navy both to protect our security, and the Navy needs colonies and bases as shipping and power projection points. And protecting this security will also protect our commerce in many ways. So profit, relieve overproduction, safety valve model, foreign trade is a symbol of national power, economic ties are going to lead to political influence in other nations as well, spread the American way of life, in creating a hospitable environment for Americans and for American investments. These are all the reasons why markets are revived after the Civil War.